The evening sun cast long shadows over the dusty path, where the weary footsteps of a lone traveler pressed into the dry earth. Daniel walked through the vast, rugged landscape, his shoulders weighed down not only by the backpack he carried but also by the unseen burden of his restless thoughts. He once believed he had everything: a promising career, seemingly strong relationships, and a life many would envy. Yet why did he still feel so empty? This journey was never part of Daniel's plan. He wasn't the type to believe in fate or predestined encounters. But an unexpected turn of events had pulled him away from his comfortable world, sending him wandering to this unfamiliar land, a place where every road seemed to test his patience. The sun dipped lower behind the distant mountains, painting the sky with hues of crimson and gold. Ahead, the road split into two paths. One led into a dense, dark forest, while the other climbed a small hill, where the silhouette of a man carrying an old wooden cross stood against the fading light. The sight made Daniel pause. There was something about the man, his calmness, his unwavering resolve under the weight of the cross, that Daniel couldn't ignore. Drawn by an invisible force, he took a step forward, then another, moving toward the man. Little did Daniel know this encounter would change his life forever. The sun was gradually setting behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in a brilliant shade of orange. The dim light of dusk stretched across the rugged path that Daniel walked on. The silence was so profound that he could hear the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat echoing in his chest. Fatigue weighed heavily on his shoulders, not just from the long journey he had traveled, but from the invisible burdens he had carried for years. His footsteps came to a halt when he saw a strange figure ahead. A man stood on the path, leaning against a large cross. He was unlike anyone Daniel had ever met before. Dressed in a long, faded brown robe, his skin was weathered by the sun, and his hands were rough with the signs of hard labor. But it was his eyes that truly captured Daniel's attention. Deep, knowing eyes that seemed to have witnessed the sorrows of the world, yet still held an inexplicable peace. Daniel frowned slightly. How could someone carry such a massive cross and remain standing there so calmly, without a trace of exhaustion? The man looked at Daniel, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You seem lost." Daniel let out a dry, cynical laugh. "Lost? I know exactly where I am." The man tilted his head slightly. "Knowing your location doesn't mean you know your direction. Are you sure you're on the right path?" Daniel fell silent. There was something unsettling about this exchange, as if the man's words were reaching into a part of his soul that he had long ignored. The man's gaze shifted to the backpack Daniel carried on his shoulders. "You're carrying something heavy." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Just my belongings." The man slowly shook his head. "No, that's not your real burden." A sudden cold breeze swept through, making Daniel shiver. His hand instinctively tightened around the strap of his backpack. He didn't understand why, but the stranger's words unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. "You've come a long way," the man continued, his voice calm yet weighty. "You've chased after things you believed would bring you happiness, your career, success, wealth. But the farther you go, the emptier you feel, don't you?" Daniel blinked. It felt as though this man had just laid bare the deepest, most unspoken thoughts in his heart. How could he possibly know? "Who are you?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. The man only smiled. Instead of answering, he adjusted the weight of the cross on his shoulder and took a step forward. "Come. Walk with me for a while." Daniel glanced at the road ahead. One path led back to where he had come from, a place familiar, yet burdened with all the weight he had carried for so long. The other path stretched forward, uncertain and unknown. Logic told him to turn back. To return to the life he had built, to the things he once believed defined success. But something else stirred within him, a small voice he had never paid attention to before, whispering, "Go." Daniel took a deep breath, then slowly stepped forward toward the man carrying the cross. He had no idea what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope in his heart. Daniel's footsteps felt heavy on the rocky path. The night had fallen, but the soft glow of the stars above made him feel a little less alone. Beside him, the man continued to carry the cross on his shoulder, walking steadily, never showing a hint of weariness. Even without looking directly at him, Daniel could sense a strange strength radiating from him. Not the raw power of muscles, but a deep peace, as if he understood everything and nothing could shake him. Daniel lowered his gaze to his dust-covered shoes. His heart was filled with questions he couldn't answer. Where was this journey leading him? What awaited him ahead? And more importantly, would he truly find the answers he was seeking? Suddenly the man stopped. Before them was a small incline with a large rock blocking the way. The man set down the cross, turned to Daniel and looked at him with deep, knowing eyes. "Put down your backpack." Daniel hesitated, instinctively tightening his grip on the straps. "Why?" The man smiled gently. "Because it's too heavy. You cannot continue this journey if you keep carrying all that weight." A wave of unease rose in Daniel's chest. He knew his backpack was heavy, but he had never considered leaving it behind. It was a part of him, everything he had accumulated over the years, his successes, his failures, his memories, his pain. If he let it go, would he still be himself? The man stepped closer, his gaze piercing into Daniel's soul. "Are you sure everything you're holding on to truly belongs to you?" Daniel blinked. The question felt like a knife cutting into his heart. He unzipped the backpack, sifting through its contents. Certificates, medals he once felt proud of, now looking at them they seemed meaningless. Old photographs from broken relationships, unsent letters, remnants of the past. He had held on to these things not because he needed them, but because he was afraid of losing a part of himself. "Are you afraid to lose them?" the man asked. Daniel swallowed hard. "They're what I spent my whole life earning." The man placed a gentle hand on the backpack. "But don't you see how exhausted they have made you?" For the first time, Daniel felt the deep exhaustion in his shoulders. Not just physical but emotional, a fatigue he had carried for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to be free. "True loss is not about what you let go of," the man continued. "It's about what you hold on to when you should have released it." Daniel's heart tightened. Let go? But he had clung to these things for so long. How could he just give them up? The man lifted the cross once more, its weight pressing on him, yet his face remained calm. "Do you believe that if you lose what no longer serves you, you will receive something far greater in return?" Daniel looked down at his hands. They were calloused from gripping too tightly for too long. If he let go, who could guarantee that he would receive something better? What if he was left with nothing at all? A cool night breeze swept through, carrying with it a quiet stillness. Daniel took a deep breath. Then, with a slight tremble, he slowly slid the backpack off his shoulders. It dropped to the ground with a heavy thud. And in that moment, something invisible but far heavier seemed to break free from within him. The man smiled. "Now you can move forward." Daniel stood still, quietly absorbing the lightness spreading through his body, his heart beating to a new rhythm. He looked ahead. The path was still uncertain, still filled with the unknown. But this time he was no longer afraid. He nodded, then stepped forward alongside the man carrying the cross, walking toward the faint light at the end of the road. Daniel walked on, his steps lighter, yet his heart still wavered. The night breeze brushed against his skin, bringing a strange sense of newfound freedom. But inside, a part of him had not fully let go. He turned to the man beside him, still walking steadily despite the heavy cross on his shoulders. His eyes did not waver, as if he had foreseen everything yet still chose to move forward. "Will I regret this?" Daniel asked, his voice growing softer. The man stopped and looked deep into his eyes. "What do you think?" Daniel bit his lip. He didn't know. He only knew that the moment he let go of his backpack, something inside him also shattered, gently yet painfully. It felt as though he had just given up a part of himself, or perhaps he had just reclaimed something long lost. They arrived at a crossroads. One road was wide, smooth and well-lit, seemingly leading to a place of safety and abundance. The other was narrow, rugged, and shrouded in darkness, its destination unknown. Daniel froze. "Is this the test?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. The man nodded. "Not everyone chooses the right path the first time. But you must understand, though the wide road is easy, it is not always right. The narrow path is difficult, but it will take you where you need to go." Daniel looked down both roads. His heart pounded. Everything inside him was at war. A part of him wanted to take the wide road. It was safer, easier, less risky. It was the path he had walked all his life, seeking security, avoiding fear, clinging to what was familiar. But deep down, another part of him, the part that had just let go of the backpack, the part that had just glimpsed a spark of freedom, was whispering that the harder road was what he truly needed. Daniel closed his eyes and took a deep breath. If he stepped onto the narrow path, he would have to face his fears. There would be pain, there would be loss. He would have to abandon old habits, old ways of thinking, even his old self. He was afraid. But then he remembered the man's eyes, calm, unwavering, filled with an unshakable certainty. If this man could carry such a heavy cross and still move forward, could Daniel not walk without his burden? Daniel opened his eyes. He gazed down the narrow path. Darkness loomed over it, but at the far end there was a small light, distant, faint, yet unwavering. He took a step. With each step he felt a transformation within him. The worries that had clung to him began to fade. His fears slowly retreated. And whenever doubt crept in, he only had to glance at the man beside him, steady, silent, yet full of strength. Daniel didn't know where this path would lead. But for the first time in his life he didn't need to know. Because for the first time he had truly chosen the right path. Daniel walked along the narrow path step by step. There was no longer anything weighing him down, no heavy backpack pressing against his back, yet his heart still carried doubts, questions without answers. The man carrying the cross walked beside him, silent yet steady. After a while Daniel spoke. "Am I losing something?" The man gave a gentle smile but did not answer immediately. They continued walking, and only when the moonlight cast its glow over the rugged path did he finally reply. "What do you think you've lost?" Daniel thought for a long moment. He remembered the things he had left behind. The backpack filled with ambition, the plans that made him feel safe, the fears and dreams he had clung to so tightly. They had once felt like essential parts of him, things he believed he could never live without. But now, after letting them go, he realized, perhaps he had never truly needed them. He had lost nothing. Maybe. "I've just found myself," Daniel whispered. The man nodded. "That's how life is," he said. "Sometimes you think you're losing something important, but in truth, it's only a shell you've wrapped yourself in. When you dare to let go, you finally see who you really are." Daniel remained silent. Something inside him had just completely unraveled. He thought back to the past, chasing success, worrying about the future, fearing failure, fearing loss. He had once believed that happiness came from having everything, but now he realized happiness wasn't about possessing. It was about knowing what truly mattered. "I've spent my whole life trying to hold on," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "But maybe, letting go was the real lesson I needed to learn." The man nodded, his eyes filled with gentle understanding. "The most important thing is not where you are going, but who you are becoming." Daniel smiled softly. He didn't know what lay ahead on this path, but there was one thing he was sure of. He was no longer afraid. Because at last he had learned life's greatest lesson.